The dust storm rolled through Shafter, Texas, like the wrath of God himself. But Victoria Garrett stood her ground in the corral, her voice low and steady as she gentled the wild mustang that had already thrown 3 men that morning. It was 1885, and the ranchers in this sun-scorched corner of West Texas had learned that, when a horse proved too much for their best bronc busters, they brought it to Victoria. Quinn Anderson watched from outside the fence, his ribs still aching from where that same buckskin stallion had sent him flying into the rails 2 hours earlier. He was 24, known throughout 3 counties as one of the finest horse breakers money could hire. But what he was witnessing made him question everything he thought he knew about his craft. The woman in the corral couldn't have been more than 22. Slight of build with sun-darkened skin and dark hair tied back in a practical braid. Yet she moved around that 1,000-pound animal like she was dancing with a willing partner, instead of negotiating with 1,500 pounds of wild fury. She never raised her voice, never cracked a whip. She simply stood there, turning her body at angles, stepping forward and back in some rhythm Quinn couldn't quite decipher. The stallion's ears flicked toward her, his head lowering incrementally. Within 20 minutes, the horse that had been pure hell on hooves was following her around the corral like a devoted dog. When Victoria finally led the stallion to the gate, Quinn stepped back to let her through. She barely glanced at him as she handed the lead rope to Jim Henderson, the ranch owner who had hired them both. "He will be ready to saddle tomorrow," Victoria said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Quinn couldn't quite place. "But only if you give him time to understand what you are asking. Force him and he will fight you again." Henderson nodded, counting out bills into her hand. Quinn watched the exchange, his pride warring with his curiosity. He had been breaking horses since he was 15. Learning the hard way on his family's ranch in Oklahoma before they lost everything in the drought of '79. Now he traveled from spread to spread, hiring out his skills, and he had never seen anything like what this woman could do. "Miss Garrett," Quinn called as she turned to leave. She stopped, looking back at him with eyes the color of strong coffee. Up close, he could see the small scar along her jawline, the calluses on her hands that marked her as someone who worked for her living just like he did. "My name is Quinn Anderson," he said, taking off his hat. "I have been breaking horses for near a decade, and I have never seen anyone work the way you do." "Then perhaps you have been breaking them wrong," Victoria replied, but there was no mockery in her voice, only simple statement of fact. Quinn felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "Maybe so. That is why I am asking if you would teach me your way. I will pay you well for the lessons." Victoria studied him for a long moment, and Quinn found himself holding his breath. She had every right to refuse. He was competition, after all, and in a territory where good-paying work could be scarce. Teaching someone your secrets was foolish business. "I do not need your money," she said finally. "But if you truly want to learn, be at my place tomorrow at dawn. I live 3 miles south of town, the adobe house with the cottonwood trees. If you are late, do not bother coming at all." She walked away before Quinn could respond, leading her own horse from Henderson's hitching post and swinging into the saddle with easy grace. Quinn watched her ride south until the heat shimmer swallowed her up, wondering what exactly he had just gotten himself into. He was there the next morning a full hour before dawn, sitting on his horse outside the small adobe house she had described. The property was modest but well kept, with a sturdy corral and a small barn that had seen better days but still stood square and true. 3 horses grazed in a paddock, and chickens scratched in the dirt near the house. Victoria emerged just as the eastern sky was turning pink, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. She handed one to Quinn without comment, then leaned against the corral fence and sipped her own. "Why do you want to learn?" she asked. Quinn thought about lying, about saying something noble about improving his craft, but something about the directness in her gaze made him speak the truth instead. "Because what I do hurts. The horses fight, I fight harder, and eventually they give up. But I see the fear in their eyes afterward, and I know they have not really learned anything except that I am stronger. What you do is different. That stallion yesterday chose to trust you. I want to know how to earn that instead of forcing it." Victoria nodded slowly. "Most men would not admit that. They would rather break bones than pride." "I have broken enough bones," Quinn said, thinking of the scars on his back, the shoulder that ached when rain was coming, the fingers that had been stomped and crushed and healed crooked. "I would like to try another way." "Then we begin," Victoria said. "But first, you must understand where I learned this. My grandmother was Mescalero Apache. She taught me that every creature has its own spirit, its own dignity. When you try to break that spirit, you might get obedience, but you will never get partnership. And a horse that is merely obedient will fail you when you need it most." Quinn listened as Victoria explained her philosophy, how she read the smallest signals from a horse, how she worked with their natural instincts instead of against them. Then she brought out a young mare, barely 3 years old, who had never been handled much beyond basic feeding. "Watch first," Victoria said. "Do not speak, just watch." For the next 2 hours, Quinn sat on the fence and observed as Victoria worked with the mare. She started by simply standing in the corral, ignoring the horse, letting the animal's curiosity overcome its fear. When the mare finally approached, Victoria turned away, making herself less threatening. It was a dance of advance and retreat, invitation and patience, and slowly the mare began to follow Victoria's movements. By the time the sun was high, the mare was accepting Victoria's touch, letting her run hands down legs and across flanks. Quinn had seen it work with the stallion, but watching the entire process from the beginning was different. He began to understand the subtle body language, the way Victoria positioned herself to encourage or discourage, guide or release. "Now you try," Victoria said, gesturing for him to enter the corral. Quinn climbed down, suddenly nervous in a way he had not been since his first time on a bronc. The mare watched him approach with wary eyes. "Stop," Victoria called when he was still 10 feet away. "You are walking like a predator. Soften your shoulders. Do not stare directly at her eyes." Quinn adjusted, feeling awkward and uncertain. He took another step. "No, you are thinking about what you want to do next. The horse can feel that. You must be present in this moment only." It was harder than Quinn had imagined, unlearning years of muscle memory and instinct. By the end of that first day, he was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion, and everything to do with the mental effort of retraining himself to think differently. "You did better than I expected," Victoria said as they unsaddled their horses that evening. "Most men cannot quiet their minds enough to hear what the horse is saying." "I still feel like I am fumbling in the dark," Quinn admitted. "That is because you are learning to use senses you have ignored your whole life. It will come." Quinn returned the next day and the next. What he had thought might be a few lessons stretched into a week, then 2. Victoria never asked for payment, though Quinn made sure to bring supplies when he came, leaving coffee and flour and sugar on her porch with careful casualness, knowing somehow that she would refuse if he offered directly. They fell into an easy rhythm. Quinn would arrive at dawn. They would work with her horses until the heat of midday drove them to the shade, then resume again in the cooler evening hours. During the worst heat, they would sit on her porch and Victoria would tell him stories her grandmother had taught her, about reading the land and the sky, about understanding that everything was connected in ways most people never noticed. "Why do you live alone out here?" Quinn asked one afternoon as they watched storm clouds gather on the horizon. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "My father was a rancher from Tennessee. He came to Texas looking for land and found my mother instead, in a mescalero camp near Fort Davis. They married against everyone's advice, his people and hers. For a while they made it work. They had this place, small but theirs. Then fever took them both when I was 16. "I am sorry," Quinn said, and meant it. "It was 6 years ago now. I have managed. The horse breaking brings enough money, and I have my garden. It is a good life, quiet. But some people in town will never see me as anything but a half-breed woman living alone. They bring me their problem horses because I am good at what I do, but they would never invite me to their churches or their socials." Quinn thought about the way men talked in saloons, the casual cruelty in their words when they spoke about anyone different from themselves. "Their loss," he said. "You are the finest horse handler I have ever met, and you have more honor than most men I know who claim to be respectable." Victoria looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "You mean that?" "Every word." The storm broke then, rain sweeping across the dry land in sheets. They moved inside the small house, and Victoria lit a lamp against the gloom. Quinn looked around the single room that served as kitchen, living space, and bedroom, noticing details he had missed before. Books on a shelf, more than he would have expected. A beautifully woven blanket that must have been her grandmother's work. A photograph in a wooden frame showing a stern-faced man and a beautiful woman with high cheekbones and dark eyes. "That is them," Victoria said, following his gaze. "My parents. That was taken in El Paso right after they married. See how young they look. They had no idea how hard it would be. But they loved each other," Quinn said, seeing it in the way the couple stood close together in the photograph, the man's hand on the woman's shoulder, protective and proud. "Yes. My father used to say that love was worth any hardship, that he would choose my mother again even knowing how his family would disown him, how people would treat them. He said some things were worth fighting for." The rain drummed on the roof, and in the close confines of the house, Quinn was acutely aware of Victoria's presence. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, she had stopped being just a teacher and had become something else entirely. He noticed the way lamplight caught in her hair, the grace of her movements as she put a kettle on the stove, the sound of her voice when she told her stories. "Victoria," he said, then stopped, unsure how to continue. She turned to look at him, waiting. "I need to tell you something. I came here to learn about horses, and you have taught me more than I could have imagined. But somewhere along the way I started coming here for more than lessons." "Quinn," she said softly, "let me finish. I know I have nothing much to offer. I am a drifter moving from ranch to ranch. I have no land of my own, no prospects beyond the skills in my hands. But I think about you every moment I am not here, and when I am here, I am already dreading the moment I have to leave. If I am speaking out of turn, tell me and I will never mention it again. But if there is any chance you might feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I need you to know. You have changed everything for me." Victoria crossed the small room to stand in front of him. Quinn's heart hammered in his chest as she reached up to touch his face, her calloused fingers gentle against his cheek. "I have been alone a long time," she said. "I learned to be sufficient unto myself, to need no one. It felt safer that way. But these past weeks, I have found myself listening for your horse in the morning, watching the road. When you bring those supplies and try to pretend it is nothing, I see you. When you work with the horses and get frustrated with yourself but refuse to give up, I see your character. You are a good man, Quinn Anderson." "Then you feel it too?" he asked, hardly daring to hope. I feel it too, she confirmed. And then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her, and it did not matter who moved first because they were finally closing the distance that had been growing smaller between them for days. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Victoria laughed softly. "This is complicated." "I know," Quinn said. "I have been trying to figure out how to stay in Shafter, but there is not enough horse-breaking work for two of us in this area." "Then we do not compete," Victoria said. "We work together. I teach you everything I know, you help me handle more horses than I can manage alone. We split the earnings." "Partners," Quinn said, testing the word. "In everything, if you want that." Victoria's eyes searched his face. "But you need to understand what you would be taking on. People here already treat me as an outsider. If you are with me, they will extend that to you. There will be talk. There will be ranchers who will not hire us because of who my mother was, or because they do not approve of us together." "Let them talk," Quinn said. "I have spent my whole life trying to fit into places that did not want me anyway. My family lost our ranch, and the people we thought were friends disappeared overnight. I have been judged for being poor, for being a drifter, for not being educated. I am tired of living by other people's rules. If they have a problem with us, that is their burden to carry, not ours." Victoria smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to absolutely beautiful. "Then I suppose we are doing this." "I suppose we are," Quinn agreed, pulling her close again. The rain continued through the evening, trapping them together in the small house. Not that either of them minded. They talked for hours, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams. Quinn told her about growing up in Oklahoma, about watching his parents work themselves to exhaustion trying to hold onto land during the drought, about the day they finally had to admit defeat. Victoria told him about her grandmother, about learning two cultures and never quite fitting fully into either, about the loneliness of being different in a place that valued conformity. "You ever wish you could leave?" Quinn asked. "Go somewhere bigger, somewhere you might fit in better." "Sometimes," Victoria admitted. "But this land is in my blood. My mother's people moved with the seasons, following the game and the water. My father's people planted roots and refused to let go even when the land turned against them. I am caught between those two ways of being. But this place, this little piece of ground, it is mine. My parents are buried here under those cottonwood trees. I cannot imagine leaving them." Quinn understood that kind of loyalty, that deep connection to place and memory. "Then we stay," he said simply. "We build something here." Over the next few months, they did exactly that. Quinn moved his few belongings into Victoria's house, and together they worked to improve the property. They expanded the corral, repaired the barn, built a better shelter for the chickens. Word spread that Victoria Garrett had taken on a partner, and some ranchers stopped hiring them altogether. But others, impressed by their results, started bringing more difficult cases. They developed a reputation as the team who could handle the horses no one else could touch. Victoria's gentle methods combined with Quinn's strength and patience proved remarkably effective. They could take a horse that had been written off as untrainable and, within a few weeks, transform it into a reliable mount. The money was not great, but it was steady, and they needed little. They had each other, they had their work, and slowly they were building a life together. Quinn had never been happier, and he could see the same contentment in Victoria. She laughed more easily now, touched him casually as she passed, sang while she worked in her garden. But not everyone in Shafter was pleased with the arrangement. There were muttered comments in town, disapproving looks from the respectable ladies who shopped at the general store. One afternoon in late fall, when Quinn was picking up supplies, Jacob Morris, one of the larger ranchers in the area, approached him outside the store. "Anderson," Morris said, his voice carrying enough volume that others could hear. I hear you are shacking up with that half-breed girl south of town." Quinn set down the supplies he was loading, turning to face Morris fully. The older man was flanked by two of his ranch hands, clearly looking for an audience. "I am living with Victoria Garrett," Quinn said evenly. "And if you have something to say about it, I suggest you say it plainly instead of hiding behind insults." Morris's face reddened. "I am saying you are throwing your life away on a woman who is not your kind. Her mother was a savage, and she is not much better. People are talking about it, about how it is not decent, you two living out there unwed." "Then perhaps we should remedy that," Quinn said, the idea forming even as he spoke, "since it is the unwed part that bothers people so much." He did not wait for Morris's response, just loaded the rest of his supplies and headed back to the house. His hands were shaking slightly on the reins, not from fear but from anger at the casual cruelty in Morris's words, and from the sudden certainty of what he wanted. When he got home, Victoria was working with a young gelding in the corral. She looked up as he dismounted, her smile fading as she saw his expression. "What happened?" Quinn told her about the encounter, watching her face close down the way it did when she was protecting herself from hurt. When he finished, she nodded once, unsurprised. "I told you it would be like this." "You did," Quinn agreed. "And I am telling you I do not care what they think, but Victoria, I want to marry you. Not because of what Morris or anyone else says, but because I want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours. I want to build a real life with you, maybe have children someday if you want that. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life and know that we chose each other, officially and completely." Victoria stared at him, her eyes suddenly bright. "You are proposing to me right now, covered in dust, angry about Jacob Morris." "I know it is not romantic," Quinn admitted. "I should have done this better, should have planned something nice. But yes, I am asking you to marry me. I do not have a ring, I do not have much of anything really, but I have my whole heart and I am offering it to you if you will take it." Victoria climbed out of the corral and crossed to him, her hands coming up to frame his face. "Quinn Anderson, you foolish, wonderful man, of course I will marry you. I would have married you months ago if you had asked. Really, really, I love you. I think I have loved you since that first day when you admitted you had been doing things wrong and asked to learn better. Most men would never have had that kind of humility." Quinn kissed her then, deep and thorough, trying to pour everything he felt into it. When they pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked. "As soon as possible. I do not need a big wedding or fancy dress. Just you and me and someone to speak the words that make it legal." They were married 3 days later by the justice of the peace in Shafter, with 2 strangers pulled in from the street to serve as witnesses. Victoria wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, and Quinn wore his best shirt, freshly washed and pressed. It was not the wedding either of them might have imagined as children, but when they spoke their vows, looking into each other's eyes, it felt more real and meaningful than any elaborate ceremony could have been. "I promise to honor you, to work beside you, to love you in good times and hard times," Quinn said, his voice steady. "I promise to see you always as you are, not as the world tries to make you. I promise to stand with you, to trust you, to build a life with you," Victoria responded. "I promise to love you with everything I am, for all the days we are given." When the justice pronounced them married, Quinn kissed his wife with a joy that made his chest ache. They walked out of that office as husband and wife, and if some people on the street looked at them with disapproval, others nodded respect, and that was enough. They returned to their little adobe house, to their horses and their work, but everything felt different now, settled in a way it had not been before. Quinn had spent so many years drifting, never quite belonging anywhere, and now he had found his home, not in a place but in a person. The winter of 1886 was mild in West Texas, and they worked through it steadily. Victoria taught Quinn everything her grandmother had taught her, not just about horses but about reading weather and land, about which plants healed and which poisoned, about the stories written in tracks and signs. Quinn taught her what he knew about ranch work and cattle, about building and fixing things, about surviving in a world that was often harder than it needed to be. By spring, Victoria knew she was pregnant. She told Quinn one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, and watched his face transform with wonder. "Are you certain?" "Very certain. Probably due sometime in October." Quinn pulled her close, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby. Lord, Victoria, I had not let myself even hope for this." "Are you happy about it?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy? I am terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I have words for. We are going to be parents. We are going to have a family." They spent the warm months preparing. Quinn built a cradle from cottonwood, carving it smooth and rocking it perfectly balanced. Victoria sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric, her hands gentle on the small garments. They talked about names, about how they would raise a child in a world that might judge them, about the values they wanted to pass on. "Our child will know both sides of their heritage," Victoria said firmly. "The best of both worlds, your determination and my grandmother's wisdom. They will know how to work with their hands, how to read the land, how to treat all creatures with respect. They will know they are loved," Quinn added. "No matter what anyone else says or thinks, they will know they are wanted and cherished." The baby came on a cool October evening, delivered by a midwife from town, who did not let her personal feelings interfere with her professional duties. It was a long labor, and Quinn paced the porch like a caged animal, praying to any god who might listen to keep Victoria safe, to bring them through this. When the baby's cry finally split the night air, Quinn nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife emerged an hour later, wiping her hands on her apron. "You have a son," she said. "Both mother and baby are healthy. You can go in now." Quinn entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Victoria lay propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle against her chest. She looked up as he approached, tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Quinn knelt beside the bed, looking down at the impossibly small person in his wife's arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny perfect fingers that gripped Quinn's thumb when he offered it. "He is beautiful," Quinn whispered, awed. "He is perfect." "What should we name him?" Victoria asked. They had discussed this endlessly over the past months, considering names from both their families, names that honored the past while looking to the future. Finally, Quinn said, "I was thinking Daniel. Daniel Anderson. It means God is my judge in Hebrew. Let God judge us and our family, not the small minds in this town." "Daniel," Victoria repeated, testing the name. "Yes, Daniel, I like it. And for a middle name, Nate, after my mother's father. He was a warrior and a wise man." "Daniel Nate Anderson," Quinn said, trying it out. "It is a strong name for a strong boy." The baby squirmed in Victoria's arms, making small sounds that were not quite cries. Quinn leaned down to kiss his wife's forehead, then gently touched his lips to his son's soft hair. "I never knew I could feel this much," he admitted. "I thought what I felt for you was the fullest my heart could be, but this is something else entirely." "I know," Victoria agreed. "It is terrifying and wonderful all at once." They settled into the rhythms of new parenthood, exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Quinn found himself amazed by how much he loved the small things. Holding his son while Victoria rested, watching the baby discover his own hands, seeing Victoria nurse their child with such tender focus. Their work with horses slowed for a few months while they adjusted, but gradually they found ways to manage both. Daniel thrived, growing strong and healthy. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, his curiosity boundless. Victoria would bring him out to the corral, keeping him safe in a shaded area while she worked, and the boy would watch the horses with fascination, gurgling and pointing with chubby fingers. "He has his mother's gift," Quinn observed one afternoon as Daniel reached through the fence rails, unafraid, and a usually skittish mare came to investigate his offered hand. "Look how calm she is with him." "Or he has his father's stubbornness," Victoria teased. "He simply refuses to believe anything might be dangerous." They were happy, building their life one day at a time. The ranch had grown modestly. They had a few horses of their own now in addition to the ones they trained for others, and they were making enough to live comfortably, if not luxuriously. More importantly, they had each other, and they had their son, and that felt like riches beyond measure. When Daniel was 2, Victoria became pregnant again. This time the morning sickness was worse, and Quinn took over more of the heavy work while she rested. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Rose, arrived in the spring of 1889, and if anything, she was even more spirited than her brother. From the moment she could crawl, she was escaping her blankets and heading for the horses, fearless and determined. "Where did she get that personality?" Victoria asked one afternoon, fishing the baby out from under the porch for the third time that day. "That is all you," Quinn said, grinning. "Pure determination wrapped in a stubborn package. Life was full, sometimes overwhelming, but always good." The children grew, learning to ride almost before they could walk properly, absorbing their parents' knowledge of horses and land. Daniel inherited his mother's gentle touch with animals, while Sarah had her father's persistence, refusing to quit even when something proved difficult. The years passed in the way years do when you are busy living them. Daniel grew tall and serious, thoughtful like his mother. Sarah remained a whirlwind of energy and opinions. When Daniel was 8 and Sarah was 6, Victoria gave birth to twins, boys they named Thomas and Matthew, and suddenly the little adobe house felt almost too small. "We need to expand," Quinn said, looking at the 4 children trying to navigate the limited space. "Maybe add on another room or 2. Or," Victoria suggested, "we could build a new house. A bigger one. We have the money saved and the children need more space." So Quinn spent the better part of a year building a proper house, with help from a few hired hands and some of the ranchers who had come to respect the family over the years. It was not grand by any means, but it was solid and spacious, with real wooden floors and glass windows and enough bedrooms that the children did not have to sleep crammed together. The night they moved in, Victoria stood in the doorway of the new house and cried. Quinn wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy tears, I hope. Very happy. I just keep thinking about my parents, about how they struggled to keep this little piece of land, how they would have loved to see this. Their grandchildren running around, this good life we have built. They would be proud of you," Quinn said. "I know I am, every single day." The children grew older, and Quinn and Victoria grew older with them. There were hard times mixed in with the good, a drought year that tested them, a winter when fever swept through, and they nearly lost Thomas. Moments when the weight of raising 4 children and running a horse ranch felt almost too heavy. But they weathered it all together, leaning on each other when times were tough, celebrating together when things went well. Daniel was 14 when he broke his first horse on his own, using his mother's methods, patient and calm, until the young mare was following him around like he was her favorite person. Victoria watched with tears in her eyes, seeing her grandmother's teachings pass down another generation. Sarah was 12 when she announced she wanted to learn to read law books, that she thought someone should stand up for people who were treated unfairly because of who their parents were or what they looked like. Quinn and Victoria scraped together money for books, for tutors, determined that their daughter would have every opportunity to chase her dreams. The twins grew into wild boys who loved the ranch work, who could rope and ride and gentle horses with a combination of their parents' skills. They were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, working together in a harmony that was beautiful to watch. As the children became more capable, Quinn and Victoria found themselves with more time together again, rediscovering the ease that had marked their early days. They would ride out together in the evenings, just the two of them, watching the sun set over the land they had built their lives on. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked one evening when they were both in their 40s, their hair showing threads of gray. "Taking on me and all the complications that came with it." Quinn looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Regret you? Regret this life, these children, every single moment we have shared. Victoria, you are the best decision I ever made. Everything good in my life stems from the day I asked you to teach me your way with horses and you said yes." "We have been fortunate," Victoria acknowledged. "Not everyone who marries for love gets to stay in love, but I love you more now than I did when we married. You have been my partner in everything, never once trying to diminish me or change who I am." "That would be impossible even if I wanted to," Quinn said with a smile. "You are a force of nature, Victoria Garrett Anderson. You always have been." They watched the sky turn colors, comfortable in the silence between them. After more than 15 years of marriage, they did not need to fill every moment with words. Sometimes it was enough just to be together, to know the other person was there. Daniel left home at 18, heading to Fort Worth to work on a large ranch operation where his skills were in high demand. It was hard to watch him go, but Quinn and Victoria had raised their children to be independent, to chase opportunities when they presented themselves. Sarah went to live with a lawyer's family in El Paso at 16, working as a clerk while she studied, determined to make her dream a reality. The twins stayed home, taking over more and more of the ranch work as Quinn and Victoria began to slow down. "We did good," Quinn said one evening as they watched Thomas and Matthew working with a difficult horse, using all the techniques they had been taught. "They are good people, all of them, strong and capable and kind. They had good examples," Victoria said, squeezing his hand. More years passed. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from Fort Worth and brought her home to meet his parents. She was a good woman, practical and warm, and she looked at Daniel like he hung the moon. Sarah passed the bar exam, one of the first women in Texas to do so, and set up a practice helping people who could not afford fancy lawyers. The twins continued working the ranch, eventually bringing home wives of their own, local girls who had grown up knowing the Anderson family and admiring their success. Grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and chaos again. Quinn, now in his 50s with more gray than dark in his hair, found himself playing the same games with his grandchildren that he had played with his own children, teaching them to ride, to respect horses, to work with patience and kindness. "You are a natural grandfather," Victoria observed, watching Quinn hoist his youngest grandson onto his shoulders. She was graying too, her face lined with the years of sun and wind and laughter, but Quinn thought she had never been more beautiful. "It is easier the second time around," Quinn admitted. I can enjoy them without worrying so much. I know now that children are resilient, that they grow up despite our best efforts to manage every moment. They settled into the comfortable rhythms of older age. The twins ran the ranch now, with Quinn and Victoria helping when needed but mostly taking on an advisory role. They had time to simply be together, to reflect on the life they had built, to appreciate how far they had come from that day in 1885, when Quinn had first watched Victoria gentle a wild horse and known he was seeing something extraordinary. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There was food and music and stories told around a bonfire, and Quinn looked around at the faces illuminated by the firelight, all of them connected to him and Victoria, all of them part of the family they had created together. Daniel stood to make a toast, his voice carrying over the assembled group. To my parents, who showed me what real love looks like, who taught me that being gentle is not weakness, that family is everything, that the opinions of small-minded people do not matter when you know who you are and what you stand for. You built something remarkable here, not just this ranch but this family, and we are all grateful to be part of it. Quinn felt Victoria's hand slip into his, her fingers lacing with his just as they had thousands of times before. He raised his glass with his free hand, looking at his wife, his partner, the woman who had changed everything for him. To Victoria, he said, who taught me that there was a better way in horses and in life, who took a chance on a cowboy who thought he knew everything and showed him he knew nothing, who gave me a family and a home and more happiness than I ever thought possible. Every day with you has been a gift. The gathered family cheered and drank, and then the music started again and people began to dance. Quinn pulled Victoria to her feet, leading her in a slow circle under the stars, the same stars that had watched them court and marry and build this life together. 30 years, Victoria said softly. Where did the time go? Into all of this, Quinn replied, gesturing at the scene around them. Into raising children and building a ranch and loving each other. I would not trade a single day of it, not even the hard days. The times when money was tight or the children were difficult or the work felt endless. Especially not those days, Quinn said. Because we got through them together, and every challenge we faced made us stronger. You are stuck with me, Victoria Anderson, for however many more years we get. That is exactly where I want to be, Victoria assured him. Stuck with you on this land with this family. You asked me once to teach you my way and I taught you, but you taught me just as much. You taught me that it was safe to trust someone, to let someone in. You taught me that love could be steady and strong, not just a spark that burns out quickly. You taught me that I deserved to be happy. They danced until the fire burned low, and the grandchildren had fallen asleep in various laps and corners. When they finally walked back to their house, older and slower but still together, Quinn paused at the door to look back at the cottonwood trees where Victoria's parents were buried, where this whole story had begun in a sense. Thank you, he said quietly, not sure if he was talking to Victoria's parents or to God or to the land itself. Thank you for all of it. Victoria slipped her arm around his waist, leaning against him. Come to bed, my love. Tomorrow there will be more horses to train, more grandchildren to spoil, more life to live. But tonight, let us just rest. They went inside together, closing the door on another day, another year, another chapter in a life that had exceeded every hope Quinn had ever dared to hold. He had come to Victoria Garrett asking her to teach him her way with horses, offering to pay her well. What he had not known then was that she would teach him so much more than that, and the payment would be his whole heart, given freely and never regretted. In the bedroom they had shared for 3 decades, Quinn pulled his wife close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the comfortable weight of her head on his shoulder. Outside, the Texas wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere a horse nickered softly in the night. Inside, two people who had found each other against the odds slept peacefully, their lives intertwined so completely that neither could remember what it felt like to be alone. The years continued to pass, as years do. Quinn and Victoria grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with time into something unshakable and eternal. They watched their grandchildren grow, some of them showing the same gift with horses that had brought Quinn and Victoria together in the first place. The ranch prospered under the twins' management, expanding slowly but steadily, becoming known throughout West Texas as a place where good horses were trained with respect and skill. When Quinn was 68 and Victoria 66, they took a trip back to the place where it had all started, riding out to the Henderson Ranch, where Quinn had first seen Victoria work her magic with that wild buckskin stallion. The ranch had changed hands several times since then, but the corral was still there, weathered but standing. "You remember?" Quinn asked, dismounting and helping Victoria down from her horse. "Every moment," Victoria replied. "I remember thinking you were just another arrogant cowboy who thought he knew everything. Then you opened your mouth and admitted you did not, and I knew you were different. I remember thinking you were the most extraordinary person I had ever seen," Quinn said. "And then getting to know you and realizing you were even more remarkable than I had imagined." They stood together in the late afternoon sun, two elderly people who had weathered decades together and come through stronger for it. Their hands found each other automatically, fingers intertwining in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. "We did it," Victoria said quietly. "We built the life we wanted, raised good children, made a difference in our little corner of the world. Despite everything that could have stopped us, all the obstacles and prejudices and hardships, we did it." "We did it together," Quinn corrected. "That was the secret all along. Not that we were perfect individually, but that together we were strong enough to handle anything." They rode home slowly, in no hurry, talking about their grandchildren and making plans for the ranch's future. When they arrived, the twins were waiting with news that Sarah had just won a major case in El Paso, defending a family's property rights against a corrupt land speculator. Pride swelled in Quinn's chest, thinking about his fierce daughter fighting for justice just like she had always said she would. That night, lying in bed, Victoria turned to Quinn with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something." Quinn's heart clenched with sudden fear. "What is it?" "Are you unwell?" "No, nothing like that. I just want you to know that whatever happens, however much more time we get, I am grateful for every single day. You gave me a life I never imagined possible. You gave me a family and a partnership and a love that sustained me through everything. I just wanted you to know that while I still can say it. Victoria, you are scaring me. I am just being realistic. We are getting older. One of these days, one of us is going to have to say goodbye to the other, and I cannot imagine how I will bear it when that happens. But I also cannot imagine having lived any other way. So I am thanking you while we are both here and healthy and can appreciate it. Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me exactly as I am." Quinn pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. "I should be thanking you for the same things. You saved me, Victoria. I was drifting when we met, belonging nowhere and to no one. You gave me a home and a purpose and reasons to wake up excited every morning. Whatever time we have left, whether it is years or decades, I will spend every moment grateful that I walked up to you that day in Henderson's corral and asked you to teach me your way." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had chosen each other long ago and had never looked back, never regretted, never wavered. Outside, the horses moved quietly in their paddock, the wind sang through the cottonwoods, and the Texas stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Quinn and Victoria Anderson lived another decade together, vital and engaged until the very end. They saw great-grandchildren born, watched Sarah become one of the most respected lawyers in West Texas, celebrated when Daniel took over management of one of the largest ranches in the territory. The twins continued the family tradition, training horses with the gentle methods Victoria had learned from her grandmother, ensuring that legacy would continue for generations. When Quinn finally passed at 78, it was peacefully in his sleep, Victoria beside him where she had been for more than 4 decades. She held his hand and whispered that she loved him, that she would see him again someday, that he had given her the most beautiful life anyone could ask for. Victoria lived another 5 years without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them making sure she was never alone unless she chose to be. She spent her final years teaching the youngest generation everything she knew, passing on her grandmother's wisdom one more time. She told stories about Quinn, about their early days together, about how love could overcome any obstacle if both people were willing to fight for it. When Victoria died at 81, she was buried next to Quinn under the cottonwood trees, beside her parents, on the land that had been her home for her entire life. At her funeral, Daniel spoke about his parents' legacy, about how they had shown everyone around them what real love looked like, what real partnership meant, how to live with integrity and courage in the face of judgment and hardship. They were extraordinary, he said, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd of family and friends. Not because they were perfect, but because they never stopped choosing each other, never stopped working together, never let the world's opinion diminish what they had built. They taught us how to love without fear, how to work with respect, how to treat all living things with gentleness and dignity. And they showed us that family, real family built on love and respect, is the most valuable thing we can create in this life. The ranch continued for generations after them, always with an Anderson working it, always with horses trained using Victoria's methods. The story of Quinn and Victoria became family legend, told and retold to new children, a reminder of where they came from and the values they were meant to uphold.